So here's a pretty typical setup for a well-run agile project. There's me and I'm coding happily along and I'm getting immediate feedback. I can immediately test my stuff as I'm coding it. And then I check in often, many times per day, many times per hour even, into my version control system. And as I check stuff in, a continuous integration system will test my stuff and build it and send me angry emails or something when I break something. And likewise for my whole team, so we're all connected to this thing. That's pretty typical. What's slightly less typical is having all this inside the cloud. In other words, me not having to install or really administrate anything. And what's also maybe not so typical is having stuff getting put into production immediately and automatically whenever they build. It's called continuous deployment. Another thing which may not be too typical is having a database also sitting there inside the cloud. So this demo is about how to get from pretty much zero to this setup in as short time as possible. And we're going to be using a service called cloudbees for all the cloudy stuff. Now, we're not starting entirely from scratch. I have an environment which is pretty typical for a Java developer. We have Java installed, we have Maven, we have Git, and we have SSH and Eclipse. Okay, let's create a new project. New project. We want a Maven project, and we want it to be called address book. And we want it to be a web application. There we go. And the simplest possible web application in the whole world, at the very least, requires a web XML inside a web info folder. So let's do that. Web XML. There. Web app. So far so good. We should now have a WAR file right there. That's a good start. Next step is to deploy it locally. I don't want to have to install a local web server or Tomcat or anything like that. I prefer to have everything kind of embedded. So we can use a nifty little plugin called the Jetty plugin. And all we do is stick it into here, which is the Maven configuration file, pom.xml. Project object model or something like that, I'm not sure. Anyway, we tell it that we would like to use Jetty, which is just an embedded web server. So if we put that in there, we should be able to type nvn jetty run. And that way we basically say, please run this web app right off of the source without building the WAR file or anything like that. Just run. So let's try. Localhost. There we go. And just to make it a little bit more fun, let's make a little web file called, or HTML file called index. That one just says, hello there. Yay! We have something up and running, and we have a really short feedback loop since we can test it as we're building it. Wow! I feel good! Alright, next step is we want this thing checked in. So we go to cloudbees. And then login. So what we want to do is create a repository. And all you do is pretty much click create a repository and give it a name. Address book, of course. There, now it exists. And there's even some friendly instructions here for how to do my first commit. Now I already have an existing project. I'm not creating a new project, so I'll just use this little sample code here. Git init, right? Creates a new repository locally, and then I want to copy this, which basically connects my local code to the repository at cloudbees. And next I want to add stuff, and I'm going to do that from Eclipse. So we go to team and share project, git, and we want to use an existing repo, which we just created, right? So the stuff we want to add is source and pom, add to index. And then we also commit. First commit. And to get this to cloudbees, we need to do push to upstream. All of this could, of course, just as well be done from the console. Alright, so now we supposedly have code in the cloud, but we can't be entirely sure, so let's go ahead and set up the build server and see what happens. Back to cloudbees then. Jenkins builds. We just go in there and we go new job and say we would like this thing to be called address book, and it is in fact a Maven project. which means that Jenkins will know the structure of the code and all that stuff. We need to tell it that we're going to use Git, and we need to tell it the URL of our repo, which happened to be this little string right here. So let's put that in there. We also need to tell it that it's actually a Maven 3 project, otherwise we can get some weird problems. Save and build. Now this takes about a minute, so I'm going to cheat and fast forward. If we're curious, we can of course click there and look at console output and find out what it's actually doing. Some Maven-y stuff right now. Alright, it's done, and it looks like it has created a WAR file. So we have gotten at least this far. Now let's see what happens if we put this thing into production. Back to cloudbees, and we click there, and we say we would like to have a new application called, guess what? Yes, and it happens to be a WAR file, a web application. So what cloudbees is doing now is putting up some kind of empty application. So we'll start there. Click. Your new app is created and now running successfully on cloudbees, and this is it right here. Great, we have an app, but it's the wrong app. We want to deploy our app. What we do then is we note what the ID of this app is, and then we go back to our Jenkins and we tell it to deploy, and we tell it to deploy to here, and that's all, like magic. Of course, it's only going to deploy after a successful build, so we need to trigger a successful build. Let's do that right now. Bang. And it looks like it worked, so let's have a look. Here's our application, and if I reload it, ta-da! There it is. Wow! I feel good. Okay, so in less than 10 minutes, we actually have an application in the cloud. That's pretty cool, but our app is quite trivial, it's quite simple, and let's make something a little bit more realistic. We want a bit of a web interface, we want tests, and we want a database. So let's start by turning this into something a little bit more real, changing this hello world into an address book. Address book with some kind of a form, let's say that. We will need some kind of servlet. Note that we're building something very simple. You can add whatever favorite web framework you have later. Input, and we will need some kind of a text field. Let's say this is add address book entry. I'm just doing some raw, simple HTML here. And you're supposed to enter the name of the person. And his phone number, right? Phone. And let's have a button. To see how this looks like, let's fire up our jetty, this time from inside the Eclipse. Jetty run, right? Was a Maven target. And let's just call this jetty. Run! And we should be able to serve to the local host, and there we go. There's our address book interface, and let's just try it out. Of course, it doesn't work. This is interface-driven development, or whatever you want to call it. So we do need some kind of servlet, which can accept this request, and we've already given it a name. So let's just go in and make sure it exists. Servlet, and it has a name, which happens to be that. And it needs a class, so let's just call it address book servlet, something like that. And it also needs a mapping. And this servlet, it lives here, right? Now I think we actually do have to restart Jetty because it needs to reload this web XML. So let's try that. Jetty. And it's complaining there's no address book servlet. And indeed it is actually right. There is no such servlet. So let's create it. In the package address book, we need a servlet. Address book servlet. And this needs to extend HTTP servlet, but I don't believe we have that in our path. So let's add that to Maven. Now we could fiddle around inside this XML file here, but there is also a nicer way to do this in the Maven plugin in Eclipse. We just go add dependency, and we just type a name, for example, servlet API, and ta-da, there it is. We can take, which one would it be? Let's try this one. And the servlet API is provided by the web container, so we don't want it included in our war file. So there we go. Servlet API. Now we should be able to import the right class here. Import HTTP servlet. Yes, we can. Now we can service this request. Request and response. Great. We can just do something simple just to see if it works. Servlet lives. This time let's start Jetty in debug mode, because that way it'll hot reload our Java code. Right, let's try it out. Yay, the servlet lives. And if hot reload works, then we should be able to do it like that. Yes, great. So we have a web interface, and now we need just a little bit of logic too. So how might that look like? Well, the simplest thing that could possibly work. Address book, goes new address book, like that, and book add entry, name, phone number, right? And first name equals like that. Very simple. And in order to prove that it worked, we should return something useful maybe. So how about added, there are now entries. So we should see this number increasing if everything works. Good. Now we are just going to make it compile. We're not going to implement it. We're just going to make it compile. So I'm going to use Eclipse magic and say create the class for me. And I don't care about the details. Just create it for me. And also please add this method. And once again, don't care about the details. Now it compiles. No, one more. Create method. There we go. So now we should be able to run this, and something should be different. Added blah blah, there are now null entries. Okay, let's write Henrik and my phone number and go. There are now null entries. Okay, so something has happened, but it's still not quite good. So now it's time to add some logic inside here. And that I would like to use TDD for. So let's create a test for this class. And for that we can do new JUnit test case. Now in the Eclipse world, sorry, in the Maven world, those tests want to live here under tests. There we go. There's our test. And it should fail because it's not yet implemented. So let's try that. Or let's JUnit test. And it failed. Great. So what is our most basic test? Can we create a new address book without exploding? Let's try that. Yes, we can. Great. We want to be able to add an entry, me. And how do we know this will work? Well, we'll see the size increase, right? So size should be 0 from the beginning. 0, book size. And then after adding me, it should be 1. There. Let's try it out. And it failed, which means we're on the right track. Let's go in here and fix it up to the simplest possible implementation. A little map with strings. Address map. There we go. And import that. And import that. Address map. And this would be the same as this size, which by the way is int. So how about that? Let's try our test. Green bar. Great. We have TDD'd some logic into this class. So now it should work. There's one entry and Mo. There are now still one entries. Okay, we need to move this thing up, I guess. Address book servlet. It is recreating the address book every time. So let's put it up here. Ugly? Yes. But it'll do for now. Let's try it out. Mo, that's 1. And Joe, 2. Great. Now it's not enough that it runs in Eclipse though, it needs to work in Maven. So we need to tell Maven about JUnit. Let's do that. We want to add a dependency to JUnit, and JUnit just take the latest one, and we only need this for test. There, go. There it is, JUnit. And now we should be able to run this in Maven, and just to be sure I'm going to do it outside of Eclipse. So mvn test. There we go, it ran 1 test. Let's check in. And there's some new things that have popped up. Let's add those. Some logic. And push. Now Jenkins should have noticed that we checked in something and should be building, and it is. And this time we should also see some tests passing. Alright, test results. There we go, 1 test run, no failures. Great. And it should be deployed automatically, right? So let's just go to our live app and reload it. And there we go. So Henrik, phone number, and there's 1 entry, and then Joe, 2 entries. Now the problem with this address book is that every time it redeploys or rebuilds, then it's going to forget all the data. We started by building this kind of hello world thingy and brought it all the way to production and set all this stuff up along the way. And now we've added a little bit of meat and done it again. Note that now once we've set this infrastructure up, it's fully automated pretty much. So it's really easy to just, deploy stuff and try it out, which also gives us the possibility of getting very early customer feedback. And that's good stuff. So next step, let's make the app just a bit more realistic and add persistence. So now we're going to create a database. And to save us a bit of hassle, we are going to use a NoSQL database called MongoDB, which is accessible through this menu right here. And Mongo. You add services and you choose Mongo, and then it's right here. So very, very easy to access. And we're going to go in there, we're going to say, I want a database. And I want it to be called, as usual, address book. And there, now we have it. Let's have a look. It is currently empty. There's nothing in it, but we will do something about that. In order to access the database, we need a user though. So let's add a user called Jim. And this password is going to be Jim8. So how do we connect to this database? Well, here is everything we need. So let's go code. We now need to do a bit of design though. This address book here is an in-memory address book, and we now want a MongoDB address book. So let's do a bit of refactoring. This guy is going to be called address book in memory. And we're going to extract an interface. And the interface is going to be called address book. Now address book in memory implements address book. And all we need to do is create another implementation for Mongo. So new class address book Mongo, which implements the interface address book. There we go. Okay. So now we get to do some coding against Mongo. And first let's get our fields in order. We have a host we got to connect to, and we need a port, a DB name, and we need a DB user and a DB password. Pretty much the same stuff you need for any kind of database. So let's check out what's what. This would be the host, and the port there, and the database name is actually that thing right there, that string. And the database user, we called him Jim, right? And if I remember correctly, the password was Jim8. Now to code against MongoDB, we need to have access to the Java drivers for Mongo. So let's go to the POM and look up that dependency. Mongo Java driver. There we go. That's the one we want. Now it's in the POM. servlet API, JUnit, and MongoDB. And we want to code against it. So we want to create a Mongo import, yes. There. Now it's angry because there are some exceptions to be dealt with, but we'll wait with those. And we now need to open our database, which is called that. And then we also need to authenticate. And that happens to be a character array. So that's how to connect import, yes. Once you've connected, we would like to find or create a so-called collection, which is the basic unit of storage inside that type of database. MongoDB is basically a hierarchical database, contains collections of collections. Collection. And I'll just create one called addresses. We want to insert something there. And the thing we want to insert is a DB object. Now we're going to need the same code down here, so let's extract a method out of most of this. In fact, out of all of that will be the same. So let's make a method out of that. And we are actually getting the address collection, so get address collection. Right. Address collection. So get address collection and put something inside it. Good. And if we move the private stuff down there, then size should be trivial. It should be basically the same thing. Get the address collection, and then return the size of it. Return address collection, get, and that's called count, and happens to be a long. So let's cast it to an int. There we go. Now we've got some exceptions to deal with. Let's just do it like this. Say that if something happens here, then just bail out because we have no idea what to do. There. We're now ready to test. We just need to tell the servlet to stop using the in-memory database or the in-memory address book and instead use the Mongo one. Okay, let's try it out. We'll add me. That's one entry, and we add Lisa. 2 entries. And how do we know if this is actually working? Well, we have to restart the web server and check that the data is still there when we get back. So we go ahead and add Sam and 3 entries. Great. So data is not being forgotten. Looks like it's working. Just for in case, let's just take a peek inside the database. Just easily done. There are the addresses. There are 3 documents in there. Great. And we look at it and oops, we got the names but not the phone numbers. The servlet is looking up phone number, but the form is sending phone, so there's a mismatch there. It's a bug inside the HTML. Imagine that. Let's test it again. Back up, reload this page, and let's add Linda. 4 entries. Good, much better. Now, note that what we have now is actually a line from here to here, since my computer is talking to the database over there. Of course, ideally we want maybe a separate database for testing and then leave the production database for production stuff. But we can fix that later. Now let's check it. There's a new file. And while we're waiting, we might as well set up Jenkins notification so that if something goes wrong, I would like to have a notification. And that's this vital feedback loop right there. Now I'm going to get angry emails whenever the build breaks. Looks like the build is done. So let's try it out. Here's our new and improved database with persistence. Henrik, I should see a number greater than 1 now, right? Yes, there we go. There are now 5 entries. We're done. We have an application in production and it uses a cloud database. It gets automatically deployed, it gets automatically built, and the source code is in the cloud, and I haven't installed pretty much anything on my computer. Really nice. Wow, I feel good. So this kind of stuff is easiest to set up from the very beginning and kind of hard to add later in a project. And as I'm sure you understand, cloudbees is not the only way to do this. There are lots of other providers such as Heroku and so on. Now, obviously, this is a very simple app that we've built. Pretty much the simplest thing we could build that has a database and a web interface. But the point is, it helped us drive the infrastructure that we need. So now that we have this in place, we can add whatever web framework we need, and we can add better design, etc., etc. And we'll be supported all along the way. Also, when we add more team members to this project, this infrastructure will help us collaborate. And as customers come in, it also helps us interact with the customers through these early and frequent deliveries, which is kind of the point of Agile, right? Anyway, I hope this was interesting to you, and happy coding. Bye-bye.